Kennewick Man is among the most significant archaeology tales of modern times. After the discovery of the remains of Kennewick Man, there has been a massive amount of confusion by the public over what he is alleged to represent. On this basis, the federal government has made several attempts to have the case solved outside the walls of court that has not showed any positive outcomes. Some of the challenges has been contributed by the suit pressed hard by the scientists, the Native Americans' objections throughout the community, the analysis of the remains and eventually the rulings of the court. The issues has therefore affected the undertakings by the scientists, on the other side the Native Americans, as well as the federal governmental organizations in conducting their work and its scrutiny by the public. The series of study was begun in the early 1998, when the news spread breaking the story about Kennewick Man in a 12-minute segment. As a matter of fact, 12 minutes can be considered to be generous for such an archaeology story, though this is not a normal archaeology tale. The story itself is interesting, especially the description of how the skull was found by the fans who had gone to participate in a boat race on the Columbia River, which is in Washington state near Kennewick, found extreme of northwestern of the United States. The two individuals were in their hobbies when they decided to pull ashore in order to have a better viewpoint of the game. The two found a human skull in a shallow water towards the edge of a bank. After taking the skull to the coroner of the country, it was then passed to an archaeologist known as James Chatters. The archaeologist with his fellow colleagues proceeded to the Columbia to retrieve an almost complete human skeleton. The skeleton had features suggesting the person was a European. It was with a long and a narrow face, which is associated with European descent. Chatters and his friends took an initiative of studying the skeleton, which to some point was challenging and confusing. The scientists have done much to deserve remains of Kennewick Man. They dedicated their time and energy to perform detailed research where they noticed that the skull had teeth with no cavities, approximating it to a man aged between 40 and 50 years. In their finding, the teeth were awfully ground down. They also observed a grinding damage in the cavity, which is usually as a result of grit in a diet. Additionally, Chatters was able to spot a projectile point that was entrenched in his right side pelvis, which is considered a cascade point, normally dated around 5,000 to 9,000 years before the present. He noticed that the point had existed there during lifetime of the individual. They also discovered a lesion in the bone that had healed partially. Chatters took a bit of the bone to another laboratory to be radiocarbon dated. To his surprise, he received the results and the radiocarbon date was said to be over 9,000 years ago. The Kennewick Man problems have not been that simple. He represented a part of a challenge that the archaeologists have found it difficult to solve. For the last 35 years or so, there has existed a belief that the American peopling has taken place for around 12,000 years ago. To this effect, Native America have held that Kennewick Man should not be handed to the scientist but to them. However, looking into the matters of fact, the scientists have done a lot that should not be overlooked. They deserve to be given the remains of Kennewick Man for their research. On the other hand, their research will help the current generation to understand the state of people in the many years ago. It therefore means that handing the remains of Kennewick Man to scientists will not only do good to them but also to the world, as they will continually document their findings as they proceed with their studies on the skull. However, the contrasting tactics ought to revive debate to fine-tune the 1990 deportation law, a virtuous law that will establish a clear and transparent process for the museums as well as the federal agencies to return specific Native American cultural matters to a lineal descendants, and the culturally affiliated communities and natives. As the most museums are meeting their inventory alongside notification deadlines, most of federal agencies have been observed to be slower to act. Having taken care of such issues, there could be no such disagreements as the skulls, for example, that of Kennewick Man would have been solved satisfactorily. In most cases, two parties may not come to a common conclusion, but policies and laws may help in handling such cases. However, the scientists should take the remains of Kennewick Man for the good of the whole world.